It was around 10 o'clock when my father and my sister found me at a ground at a nearby park, about 10 minutes away from my house. I was bruised, unconscious, and had 2 black eyes. I actually don't remember much more outside of that because that's what they had told me. I was 13 years old when I had my first taste of physical high school bullying. But for as long as I could remember, I was always called Shizu, Sushi, Shizi, anything but my real name, which is Shizu. It means quiet in Japanese, which is a whole other TED Talk. My parents, when they saw me, were furious. They wanted to call the police. They didn't speak any English. I said no. How could I show up to school the next day? How could I make new friends? And that's when my life changed forever. I decided in that moment that I would seek revenge in my own way, which was to become successful. In my very narrow definition of success at the time, it was to become powerful, to be rich. And so that one day, I would never feel so unseen, small, or powerless ever again. And that's when everything changed. My parents were both Japanese immigrants. My father moved from Tokyo as a cow farmer, spoke no English, dropped out of college, and would always sleep in so he'd miss class. He also then eventually became one of Canada's best known Japanese garden landscapers. My mother was a photographer. She moved to Vancouver to become a photographer for the expo, where they eventually had met. She was also a full-time mother of 3. I was the youngest. Again, my parents didn't speak any English, so when I would approach to them about the pain that I felt after that night, there wasn't really any kind of understanding. I also struggled to speak my pain in Japanese. Therapy wasn't really an option. So we did what a lot of people did back then, and sometimes I still do, brushed it under a rug and moved on with our lives. I wish I could say that the years that followed that night got easier, but truly, unfortunately, they didn't. My grandparents had all passed in Japan. We dealt with some financial issues and a string of other mental health issues within our own family. And that's when I started to cope with all the stress and anxiety with alcohol, food, and most importantly, with work. At a very early young age, I started to juggle about 3 different jobs, and by 16, I had moved out. I was lifeguarding and teaching swimming in the morning, going to school, then went to Aldo to sell some shoes, and then became a bartender at night. I had 4 different identities within one day. I could outwork anybody. At one point, I moved out, and I realized that if I was going to become that successful person that I wanted to be, that I needed to leave Vancouver. I worked really hard, and I eventually hustled my way to New York City. I became a Wall Street trader, and I thought I had made it. I was so wrong. In New York, those strings of years as a trader felt like one really long night. I truly loved the people that I worked with, but it felt so empty inside. I felt like I was only working on the resume virtues of my life and nothing about the eulogy virtues of my life. I would cope with the stress by chewing and eating ice. I would purposely dehydrate myself with no water because the trading floor was 15 minutes away when there was not a lot of women on that desk at the time. Success at the time was also validated by how much money I made, so I never left my desk. Eventually, at the age of 21, I had diagnosed myself with what I would then call the hungry ghost syndrome. And it's this idea that no matter how much I ate, or how much money I made, or how much I tried to climb that corporate ladder, it was never enough. I wanted more, and I wanted more, and I wanted more, and I was never full. And that's when I decided it was time to reset and quit. So I decided to pack all my things into a little box, gave everything else away. I quit Goldman Sachs, broke my lease in Tribeca, and I decided to journey, and I journeyed east. I eventually landed in Maputo, which is the capital of Mozambique, a third world country based in Africa. I volunteered for about 8 months working on a banana farm, helping smallhold farmers raise capital for various projects, but specifically bananas. I learned so much about bananas. I also felt like I was reconnecting back with myself and starting to slowly piece together these broken parts of my life. In Japanese, we call that wabi-sabi, which means the natural imperfections in our lives are the most beautiful things. I would run along the Indian Ocean and eventually even got to summit Mount Kilimanjaro, which was my first testament in learning around patience, patience with myself, patience with other people, stamina, and strength. I left Mozambique with a bank account that was nearly empty and decided to go back to Japan. I wanted to learn more about my name, Shizu, and how I came to be into this world and why. Sometimes, when you don't have answers to what's happened to you, you seek answers from the past. I started my trip at Yakushima. This is a cedar tree where you look up and there's a shape like a heart. It's 5,000 years old. This is also an island called the Moss Island in Japan. It is also the island that inspired the global hit sensation and my personal favorite movie, Princess Mononoke. It's an idea of, and story, where the natural world collides with the industrial world. Eventually, though, Mother Nature, she always wins. It is also the place that inspired me so much about this concept called forest bathing, or shinrin-yoku in Japanese. And it's this idea where you take your shoes off, immerse yourself on the moss, and consume the fresh oxygen that these trees provide over thousands and thousands of years. It changed my life. I knew my trip to Japan was slowly coming to an end, and I started to know that I needed to make peace with my own mind. So I decided to go to Kyoto, the first capital of Japan, and what I would think is the most spiritual city in the world. I visited every temple that you could find in Kyoto in hopes for peace with my mind and learning how to meditate, also known as zazen. And as the fall turned to winter and the leaves went on fire to red, I quickly found myself ending the day always at this beautiful garden, which you may have seen. It's the Ryoanji Garden. In Japanese garden principle, these rocks represent mountains, the moss represents the land, and the circular rocks around represent the ocean. It was so stunning. And that's when my first realization around healing truly started to sit in. Forgiveness was less for those girls in the park or for other people, it was for myself. And as slowly the weight started to shed off my shoulders, I felt like nature took on that extra load. It was time to go home. At 22, it was a huge turning point of my life. I eventually went back west, and I landed in Washington, D.C. I started my first company, which is a cold-pressed juice business. Ran that for 8 years. We opened 15 stores, raised venture capital, and eventually got acquired. I started my second company, which was a tech company. That did not last long. I am not a tech company founder. So I quickly shut that one down and eventually started my third business today called Apothecary, where we really bridge East and West and nature as medicine to provide getting everybody to the root cause of healing and not just treat the symptom. We believe that everything is possible with learning a little bit of these natural, subtle cues that our environments provide us all around us. I don't believe I was put on this earth for the pursuit of happiness. I believe I was put on this earth for the pursuit of healing, which is a linear journey that is never going to end and it will never be bound by time. I don't believe that any of us here are necessarily going to have that perfect journey, and our stories will always exist, but it's up to us to let those stories either define us or shape who we are today. So, I think I would like to just say a few things and hopes and prayers for anyone that's listening and that anyone that has gone through any kind of pain in the past. Next time you feel lost and unseen, perhaps a little confused, I hope you can go to the high mountains and know that those passing thoughts in your minds can be represented by the passing thoughts and clouds in the sky. And know that the blue sky is always going to be above you. Next time you feel anxious, lost, and unsettled, I hope you know that the forest is always going to be this non-judgment-free zone for you, and always to know that that oxygen and wisdom is surrounding you with thousands and thousands of trees. And next time you feel bullied, angry, small, or unseen, I'm sorry you've been there. I've been there. If I am any example of what's on the other side, Just like seasons turn from fall to winter and bud new life into the spring, there is a new identity on that other side. Healing, again, is not linear, but I have learned so much from nature as a profound teacher around resilience, non-judgment, and forgiveness. I know today that so many of you are probably already on that journey, and I know you will all find your way. I so appreciate you being part of mine. Thank you.